I wanted to thank everyone for coming to the fifth part and the final part of our seminar series titled Shattering the Academic Language Barrier, Climate Science Explained. Throughout this past month, we've explored many different issues, all fluctuating around climate change. We've talked about climate forecasting, how we predict the future in terms of climate, how models work under various different scenarios. We've explored how to study past climate, that is, using ice cores and dendrochronology and stuff of that nature. We've also explored ecological transformation that has occurred and is occurring due to climate change right now. Last week we talked about science in the media and we came to the conclusion that publications in research, publications in the media, and blogs are all very different types of publications. Ultimately, all of this lands on us now. The information that we've been going over isn't something new. This isn't something that we just made available to us over the past couple of months. This is something that researchers, politicians, corporations, everything that we know has been known for decades. This is huge. And this is where it gets really interesting, because you have few people that say we can't actually change anything. Humans are a very small force of nature. But still, and a lot of people are still waiting on that perfect technology, that technology that's going to save us. Like in Star Trek, I don't know if you guys are Star Trek, like the transponder or the food replicator or interstellar travel. Or in I can go along a lot, but there are a lot of examples of future technologies. But we don't really need that. If we were to implement our current technologies, according to the IPC and Resnar, North America would actually already be able to reach its Kyoto levels. This is not something we have to look forward to. Of course, future technologies are going to help us, and they're going to play a really important part. But we don't have to wait for that future to come. We can already start doing with what we have thus far. And so today we have two speakers, both of whom are going to be talking about what's actually happening right now. These two people are on the front lines of climate changes for the masses. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Dan Hendry. Dan Hendry promotes sustainability initiatives for the city of Kingston and for the Limestone District School Board. He's been intricately involved with development and implementation of Sustainable Kingston and has designed sustainability-related programs for the Limestone District School Board. His credentials include a master's in strategic leadership towards sustainability from the Institute of Technology, a bachelor's of commerce from Royal Roads University, and an international business diploma from Seneca College. In Sweden, at BTH, Dan studied under Dr. Carl-Henrik Robert, the founder of the Natural Step. Dan has spent a couple of years teaching English in South Korea and is also an active volunteer with TV Kojiko and the local Canadian Red Cross disaster management team. Please everyone join me in welcoming Dan Hendry.
Thank you. Just 1 second, I'm going to set this up. I've been asked to come to speak for 5 to 10 minutes about some of the projects I've been working on in the city, or in Kingston community. As you can see here with the current project I'm seconded part-time for, I do work part-time for the city, about 20 hours a week, is helping develop the Kingston Climate Action Plan. A climate action plan, these are happening all over Canada. They're funded partially by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and it's basically looking at a baseline using the greenhouse gases emitted in your community, kind of showing where things are being emitted, and then providing best kind of bang for your buck or best steps forward or what could happen, strategies basically to help mitigate climate change. The report itself also has a bit on adaptation, but with the way these are funded and supported by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, it doesn't focus right on adaptation, though we do have a small piece in it. In my background, I studied in Sweden for about a year, doing my master's in strategic leadership towards sustainability. I'll touch a bit on that, but only because it's this. I mean, I always put this picture up. Tomorrow, in fact, I work for the school board as well. I do, in the morning, I'm presenting to grade 4s at a school. In the afternoon, I'm a guest judge at the MBA program. So my job is quite diverse. I talk about this type of thing to quite a diverse group of people. Now, this is why it doesn't matter who I'm talking to. This is fundamentally, I mean, this picture has changed my world, quite literally. It was about 44 years ago now, they took this picture. And I think, at one point, all the educators said that the world was flat. This one shows that we're clearly not. It also shows that we're floating here. All the great wars, the great religions, my parents, your parents, our grandparents, everything we know has happened here. Now, systemically, another thing that matters, and I think more than anything, when it comes to climate change, sustainability, food systems, whatever we talk about, are these dates coming up to you right now. At least years, sorry. 1804, 1927, 1960, 1974, 1987, 1999, and 2011. Those are all the years humanity reached 1 more billion people. So that's now 7 billion people. If you're a kindergarten class, which I presented to just a couple days ago, I get them to hold up the numbers, just so you can see, you're one of them, I'm one of them. I'm probably 1.5 of them. That was a joke, bad joke. I've lost a couple pounds since, but seriously, 7 billion people. Now that just means that this is compounding. Our actions, what we need, food, water, energy, we need this, we use it. It can be happening, it's not the same for the 7 billion people necessarily, but we all require it in some capacity, especially food and water and energy and the different greenhouse gases that we emit, even in those basic systems, are quite tremendous in how we have everything set up. This is a bit about what I'd studied. Again, it's not, let's say, with the city of Kingston per se, but it's just to show that, we're taking from the lithosphere, and we're systemically putting things into the biosphere. That's the issue. Carbon's natural. That's not the point. It's the fact that these cycles are very different, and the lithosphere is very slow, and the biosphere is not necessarily. And we're systematically compounding and putting things into the biosphere. Okay, but that's my expertise. However, I'm here to talk about the Kingston Climate Action Plan. These climate action plans are basically plans, like I said, compasses, let's say, to navigate the waters of a changing climate. So I'll give you the idea of the baseline. Here at the City of Kingston, the city, our community, we do have community greenhouse gas reports. The last one done in 2011, showing a breakdown of how we in our community, not just the city, not just this company, not just me, not just you, but us as a whole, how we're actually contributing to greenhouse gases in our community. So using that information, and working with consultants and scientists that are using the recent IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the 5th report that just came out last fall, and scenario planning. This report also shows what Kingston will or could look like given the scenarios with the recent data. It didn't happen like this year, trust me, because I'm also an organizer of the Off the Grid concert down there. And I was almost out there with a pickaxe the other day trying to get the ice off the rink. But changing climate doesn't always mean, it's all over the place. I was in a coffee shop the other day and I heard someone say, honestly it was a conversation, I was sitting there and somebody said, climate change, liberal agenda. I said, look, it's cold outside, it's still cold. And I just thought to myself, wow, so your opinion sitting here in a coffee shop in Kingston, Ontario on this very day now dedicates the thought of the whole global climate system. Well, that's intelligent. But I didn't say anything. I got my coffee in a to-go or in a reusable cup and left. So, so the project itself, it's to help organize basically actions that can show how we can actually reduce greenhouse gases in our community. Aligning, we've had different round tables. There have been draft reports to the public, consultations, and it's not Earth Day anymore. It's June 5th, and this is to do with the scheduling of the plan itself, which it'll be out into the community. The greenhouse gas reports, the snapshots of the baseline in which we use, are available on the City of Kingston's website. You know this, you're here. This year, 400 parts per million. I'm scared every day. I pretend not to be, but I am. I don't say that to the kids, though. What does that mean? What does a warmer climate mean? You've been to, or you're interested in this, it's a plethora of different things and different systems. And it's hard to predict exactly what Kingston will look like. But this is generally a slide that I was given to show some of the different things, whether it be the thawing of the permafrost, the damaging of coral, and in these complex systems, how they all affect each other. And here in Kingston. So this is taken from that 2011 greenhouse gas report. Some things are deceiving as well. If you'll notice, I believe, Dr. Mabee, in 2006, it was because the Ontario power supply. In fact, now this is different. Our power supply, and you'll probably hear more about it later, our energy supply, about 70% is non-renewable, but that includes nuclear, right? It's not greenhouse gas emitting as much as coal or gas. Coal is being or is phased out. Natural gas, methane, they like to call it. I don't like the word natural, That even on products nowadays is just a brand. I've seen people say, oh, it's natural, it's good for you. No, that's a TM. That doesn't mean anything. It just means, anyway, that's just, sorry, my rant, not the city's. But you'll see here, it shows the greenhouse gas emissions and trends. Within the report itself, the climate action plan it'll be coming out in early June. I know that the breakdown for ICI, which is industrial, commercial, and institution, which is a big part Kingston, it contributes to about 51% of our greenhouse gases, and we're all part of it in some capacity. So I put this up. I've taken this from the internet. I didn't do this myself. It's just to visually represent. Sometimes I find whether I'm speaking to grade ones or in the community, it's very hard. These ideas are very abstract in some ways. So this was done in Copenhagen to visually show what a ton of greenhouse gases would look like. So this slide here is one based on the data that we were given. It was taken from the IPCC report AR5, which just came out. And the idea is that we're basically looking at more, by 2020, the climate of that of Syracuse, New York, and 2050, that of Columbus, Ohio. Now, these aren't the best things to use because some people first think, what's Columbus look like? I know they have the Blue Jackets, but I don't pay attention to that because they're not the Leafs. And I'm just joking, it's the Senators I go for. But regardless of that, there's this climate area. Some people, when I said that, they're like, oh, Columbus, that means we don't have to shovel. I'm like, yeah. If you don't want to shovel, go to Columbus. Don't live in Ontario, and let's not try to change alter the climate system because you don't want to shovel. But what does that mean for heating and cooling degree days, our infrastructure, our food system? All of these different things will be influenced by the alteration of the climate patterns. I've taken a couple snapshots. These are, again, from the latest report. But just to show you, there is a breakdown of many different things, whether it be precipitation, extreme wind days, average temperatures. As you can see here, given the data that we've been putting together with the scientists, that it is projecting to increase every year. And again, what does that mean for the system? It's not just we don't have to shovel. It's, what? How are we all heating everything? Just changing those degree heating days, it really changes the whole system, right? Or cool. Precipitation again. What does that mean? I volunteer for the Red Cross as well on the disaster management team. And you know what? Natural disasters are going up. We have to prepare. It's not fun. But I'm not a giant ostrich, and I think that's all made up. They put their head in the ground, But when you're scared, but you got to face it, or else we won't fix it, or at least try to. I will die trying. This happened. This is Alberta, so we know what can happen with the changing climate. So how can we alter our infrastructure? And some of this is recommended in the report, but mostly mitigation, not necessarily adaptation. These are the themes that are in the report released in early June. All the public feedback has gone into that. There's also a good baseline of things that are happening, because it's not nice to stand up doom and gloom and kind of say, okay, what do we have to do? There are things that are happening. So what can we build upon? And in all of these systems, that's where it starts from. So I'll leave you with this. This is a thing I'm working on, not this. This is in the Himalayas. They're called prayer flags. But one thing I'm working on right now, I've got probably about 400 made. They're old swatches of material, and I'm trying to create if you're interested in it, keep an eye out for it. If you'd like to participate, you can email me. But basically, these are called climate cloths, I'm calling them, and it's going to help around early June, and I don't know where it will be. It'll be a public form of art to draw attention to the release of the plan, but it was hundreds of these kind of action-oriented things. And the last story I'll leave with is this. This is a campaign I put together. It'll be released shortly on social media. A couple quick stories, and I think I do have a couple quick minutes, and I do. Who are they? This is what I don't know. I've been told they should do it. You know what? I look in the mirror every day, and that's when I decided that I'm they, and you're they, we're they. In Korean, I studied Korean. I was there for a while. Uri in Korean means us, our, we. I like the term. Korea is a very homogeneous culture, so kind of in the language. But this is something I kind of thought up as a strategy to engage people in talking about this, because it's a very scary topic, and sometimes it can feel like we can't do much about it. But this is the individual. So the first thing to engage people, I'd say, what do you do? What are you doing? It's called I Do, I Will. So I buy local organic food. You know what? That's good. And you got to tell somebody, we're doing good. Validation. We're doing, that's okay. It might not be perfect, but it's a start. And then the next thing is, what's something you will do? What could you do better? So I've got hundreds of these photos, from the mayor to the town crier to these two little boys. That was pretty funny, because there was a little dog. Their dog was in the picture first, and it was sitting right in front of the sign. I'm like, this is good, but we got to get the dog out. But this is something that's being released right now. So this is called I Do, I Will. These photos are strewn within the plan as well. But I'm going to leave it at that. And if you have any questions regarding the plan, it's just a 5-minute, 10-minute presentation. Or look for it early June. Keep an eye out for it. And then hopefully you can use this as well if you're interested in this to help with different community actions that we can do together. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Dan?
Yes.
So what happened in 2006 then?
It was the alter coal.
Yeah, coal and recession, coal and some industry hits.
And that was the whole. So that's why some of this data you got to really kind of look at it and take time, because I mean some people said, "Oh, we did great that year," you know, but it was really the whole power, the whole energy system.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah. Sorry.
All right, so thank you. So thank you, Dan. Actually, as I was going through Dan's talk, I kept thinking of the really old ad. Well, I don't know how old it is, but the adage that I was taught: think global, act local. And this is really important. It's extremely important to us to look in our own backyards, and that's the slide with all the photos with everyone. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. These are things that we can literally and figuratively do in our own backyards. And it's important to understand and really figure out what we can do with our own, pretty much in our own backyards, like I already said. Any little thing that we can do, it all helps out overall in the end. Now, ultimately, our last keynote address for the seminar series will be by Dr. Warren Mabee. Dr. Warren Mabee, who holds a PhD from the University of Toronto, also holds a Canada Research Chair, Tier 2, in Renewable Energy Development and Implementation. He's an associate. It's wrong over here. I caught it before I said it, which is the important thing. He's an associate professor at Queen's with a joint appointment both in the School of Policy Studies as well as in the Department of Geography. I've recently learned that when faculty members are joint or cross-appointed, it doesn't mean they get paid double. It actually means they get paid the same amount and have double the work. So we are very grateful. His international research program focuses on the interface between policy and technology in an area of renewable energy and fuels, addressing issues that bridge the gap between researchers and decision makers. His past work includes stints at the University of British Columbia and the University of Toronto, as well as the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Dr. Mabee is currently Associate Task Leader for Policy for the International Energy Agency Bioenergy Task 39, and the Director for Queen's Institute for Energy and Environmental Policy. Please, everyone, join me in welcoming Dr. Warren Mabee.
Okay, let me get my talk up here. And click. So, first off, thanks very much to everybody for coming out tonight. I know that as the weather gets nicer, there's more things to do, and so I appreciate you taking time out of your evening to be here. I really didn't know what I was going to cover in this talk when I started putting it together, because there's just so many interesting things going on. You know, there are all kinds of policies happening at the local level, which Dan has kind of filled us in on a little bit. There's things that are happening at the provincial level, at the national level, at the international level. I decided that I'd kind of hang my talk around energy because I work on energy and I work on environment, and I like the interconnection between the two. So that's what we're going to get today. I have too many slides, I have to warn everybody. Too many slides, that means that I'm going to go quick through some of them. I can make them available, though, if there's things that I go past that you would like to look at in more detail. So what's the current state of play? Well, the black line up here shows you just where we are with greenhouse gas emissions, going back to 1990, coming up to now 2013. We're sitting at about 735 million tons of greenhouse gas, which is in carbon dioxide equivalents every year. We're emitting that right across Canada, and I'm going to show you a little bit about how we're emitting that. You can see all the colored dotted lines there. That shows you all of the climate plans that we've come up with over the years and the trajectories that we're on them. So you can see that at least the action plan in 2000, we were on track for almost a year. We have had some real drops in our greenhouse gas emissions. We've had a big drop over the last couple of years for two reasons. Number one, Ontario has taken some of the biggest coal-fired generators offline, so we no longer have those emissions. But more importantly, our economy has been in the dumps, and we're losing the big energy users that used to use up huge amounts of power. I'm thinking of pulp and paper plants, I'm thinking of steel plants, I'm thinking of those big industrial installations that are really dropping away from the landscape. So that's why we see that little dip around 2008, 2009. You know, it didn't help that the world's economy collapsed. Our economy is bouncing back, as you can see, because the emissions are going up again. We want to get to 17% below our 2005 level by 2020, which would take us to about 609 megatons. We're on track to hit about 734 megatons, which is right about where we are right now. We're way off. We're not going to hit our targets, and our targets were weak compared to what the old targets were anyway. So that's where we are. As I said, we have this goal, 17% reductions by 2020. The government's actually gone further, because governments like to go far, and they've said that they want 60 to 70% reductions by 2050, which, if you will carefully note, you will realize that Stephen Harper will not be in power. So he will not have to figure out how to do that. He has said he wants to get 90% of Canada's electricity provided by non-emitting sources by 2020. We're at about 75% right now, so it's really not that difficult. It's not as big of an achievement. What are our other climate policies? Well, we have some new pipelines that we want to build. Those are climate policies. They're just not particularly green policies. We do have some new regulations on automotive emissions, and we may get a new climate policy. You know, the government has never talked about this, but Prime Minister Harper did write a letter to Barack Obama saying that if he would approve Keystone, we could talk climate. So that might happen. That's how decisions get made sometimes. What's happening across our country? Well, let's look at four of the big ones. Here's Alberta. Of course, they support pipeline projects. Alberta is one of the only places in the country, there are two others, but one of the few that has a price on carbon, $15 a ton for big industrial emitters, over 100,000 tons per year of CO2 emissions. Alison Redford, before her kind of government started to collapse on her, actually had proposed raising that to about $40 a ton, but she almost had a caucus revolt over that, and so she decided not to. They take the money that they're making off of this carbon price and they put it into what they call the Climate Change and Emissions Management Fund. A lot of that is administered through Alberta Innovates, and they actually have a terrific research program. Alberta is doing lots of great research on these topics, working on ways to bring emissions down, to come up with greener products. It's too bad that the good work is kind of overwhelmed by the emission signature that's associated with the oil sands and with the development there. British Columbia just recently has said that they have a bit of support for the Northern Gateway project. You may remember that Christy Clark famously put forward 5 conditions before she would approve Northern Gateway, which is one of the pipelines. She asked for money and for some guarantees around cleanup and around spills, environmental concerns. They're now saying that they could work something out. They do have a carbon tax in BC. It's risen to about 7.2 cents a litre on fuel. There's a charge that goes on to electricity generation and things like that as well. And they have a cap and trade system which would allow the trade of carbon credits. Not a lot is happening with cap and trade because very few jurisdictions have actually followed through with it, but BC was one of the ones that did. Quebec, they've got a pipeline decision to make around Energy East, which we'll talk about in a little while. They have a carbon tax as well. It's an almost invisible tax. It's less than a cent a litre, but it gives them about $1.15 billion a year to work with. And they have about $1.5 billion, or they did between 2006 and 2012, to put towards greenhouse gas emission reduction measures. They are the only province that met their Kyoto targets. So they met their Kyoto targets, and to spare because all of their power comes from hydroelectric. They sell a lot of hydroelectric power. They get credits for this. they are now looking at some fossil forms of energy. So they are looking at fracking, they are looking at oil exploration on Anticosti Island and in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So it remains to be seen just how this is going to shape up. I expected it to be a bit more of a play in the election, but of course the specter of separation has kind of overwhelmed the environmental side. And then there's Ontario. Ontario, we haven't made any decisions on Energy East, the pipeline that's going to run through our province. In fact, we get more of Energy East than anybody else. We do have the Green Energy and Green Economy Act, which came in 2008, was passed in 2009, partly to respond to that phase out of coal-fired power. And that has reduced our emissions by about 30 million tons per year, so this is not an insignificant thing. But as you know, people who live around Kingston are particularly aware the Green Energy Act has not been without contention. It has not created all sweetness and light. There is a lot of pushback against the Green Energy Act and the way that it was instituted. In fact, many of my policy colleagues think that it was one of the worst written pieces of legislation that they'd ever seen. It was badly formed. It funneled a lot of power into the hands of the minister's office. And if you don't have a really strong minister with their hand on the wheel, they have a very difficult time managing it, which is what's ended up happening. This is a round the horn sort of look at what's going on in Canada. Well, what is going on? Well, you'll see that there's a real strong focus on electricity generation as a means of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, you could argue that it's the tool of choice. Governments talk about greenhouse gas emissions associated with electricity more than anything else, it seems like. There's lots of carbon pricing, maybe not support for carbon pricing across the country. About 40% of Canada's population currently pays some kind of a carbon price. We could certainly argue whether the price is right. You know, if we're anything close to what a true value of carbon should be. You could also argue that the way that these policies are being implemented across the country is very haphazard. You know, it's different in every jurisdiction. And that means that there's a lot of wiggle room for industry. There's not a lot of consistency in the way that these policies are being applied. So what's the emissions puzzle look like in Canada? We had a little bit of this already when we looked at Kingston's emissions and how they have evolved over the years. One thing to think about before we jump into that is where does our energy come from and how does that all come about? You know, I like this picture. This is a picture taken in early February of the Great Lakes, just as we were approaching that kind of record ice cover. And the question that always pops into my mind, you know, it's not just hot summers, it's really cold winters. We'll probably get more of those. We're going to need more power in all kinds of forms. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to achieve the power that we need? This is where our emissions come from right now. Electricity production is down there. It's about 18% of the overall emissions. Light duty and heavy duty road transport make up just under 25%, something like 22%. Fossil fuel production is just around 10%. So for people that think of the oil sands as the big problem, actually they're not the big problem. The biggest problems in Canada aren't the oil sands. The biggest problems are transport. And you're going to see in a second where I'm going with this. We have other stationary combustion sources, other transport emissions from aircraft and marine. We have some fugitive sources, and fugitive sources are very, very difficult to keep track of because they're often not claimed by any one jurisdiction. Think of airplanes traveling from here to Europe. The emissions associated with that are fugitive. They don't belong to anybody. They just happen. Same with marine transport. When you have leaks and problems along lines, you have fugitive emissions that you can't track. There's a small slice associated with agriculture, just a little bit smaller than fossil fuel production, and some associated with waste. This is how they've changed since 1990. So the most growth that we've seen, the most dramatic changes in emissions have been with heavy-duty road transport, which have gone up by 54%. That's more than double our rate of population growth. This is the Walmart effect. This is the rolling transport, rolling warehouses that are out on the highway every day, every night. Fugitive sources, there are more and more places where we're just not really seeing the emissions or tracking the emissions. Light-duty road transport has gone up just a little bit faster than population growth. Canada's population between 1990 and 2009 grew by 25%. So up to 25%, which is where fossil fuel production sits, you're really just seeing growth at the rate of population growth. Below that, you're actually improving on a per capita basis. So other transport emissions are getting better, not worse. Aircraft emissions are getting better. I'm not a big fan of jets at the island airport, but the jets that they want will have much lower emissions than the old jets and the old turboprops. Waste, that's going down. Electricity production, it increased by 7% and our population increased by 25%. That means that our electricity production per capita footprint is going down significantly. Other industrial processes and stationary combustion sources, they've really decreased. They've absolutely decreased in that period. That's why I don't highlight them as a big problem in that graph, although they are very big slices. We're already attacking them. We're either attacking them through much more efficient plants, or we're attacking them because the plants are moving to Mexico, which is a fugitive emission. This is a problem, and it's a problem to deal with. I actually think that we would do much better by having the plants up here and making them much more efficient. And maybe we can get to that. How does this relate to our energy use? Well, this is where Canada sits, about 2% of global energy, about 2% of global emissions. We use a lot of oil compared to the States. That's our transport. That's not just what is, this doesn't include what's being exported. This is just our use. We use a fair bit of coal still. We use a lot of natural gas. But we have a huge renewable proportion. We have 19% renewables across the board. We do really well. We do better than any G7 country. We do better than most of the G20. There are a few countries that are greener than us, but they tend to be very small. And they tend to be countries that have a lot of natural sort of endowment like we do. We also have a nuclear portion, which is about 10% of our total primary energy supply. It's almost all here in Ontario. It's almost all our electricity here. So I don't include that as a renewable because I don't think of it as a renewable. But it is cleaner in terms of emissions. So if you put that in, a quarter of what we are using is clean. More than a quarter. This is what the world looks like. The world actually sits at an average of about 12% renewables. 10% of that is biomass. And most of that is biomass that is being burned at subsistence levels. This is people heating their homes or cooking their food, with twigs that they've gathered, using very, very low-tech approaches, not actually recovering a fraction of the energy that's in that biomass. There's some hydro, there's some other renewables out there. That other renewables is coming up. This is a 2010 number. By 2013, we should be more than 1% because we've seen such expansion in other renewables, wind and solar particularly. Nuclear is small, but then look at the big three: oil, coal, natural gas. They're all fairly close, 32, 28, 21%. These are the big ones. These are the difficult ones to deal with. Very quickly, this is the States, 5% renewables, a big slice of nuclear. I bet you didn't know that. The US still has a bigger nuclear fleet than anybody, not including their nuclear fleet. The use of coal is actually going up in the States. There was a picture, I was going to cut it out and stick it on this, from Wired magazine. Wired magazine is supposed to be about computers and stuff. It was all about coal. We need it. Renewables aren't enough. So this is what they think. Germany, they sit at about 12% renewables. Germany is like a poster child for renewables. They've done so much that actually their other renewable slice is more than 1%. It's 2%. They have 1% hydro. They have a lot of nuclear, but they want to get rid of it. because they were not impressed with Fukushima and what happened there. But they still have 3/4 of their energy supply from the big three. And this is a big issue. And here's China, just so that we round out the circle. Oil's at 18%, coal's at 67% of their energy supply. They're still building coal plants, not as fast as they were a while ago. You know, there was this kind of stat that somebody made up for USA Today, and everybody quoted about 1 new plant a week. It was never 1 new plant a week. The fastest I think they ever got to was 1 new plant every 3 weeks, and that was just for a couple years. They're more like 1 new plant a month right now, but it is coming up quickly. They're also building at least 1 new wind farm a month. So they're actually building that quicker than they're building the other. They have 3% hydro, 2% of that actually is the Three Gorges Dam, and lots of people didn't like the Three Gorges Dam. They haven't gotten into nuclear in a big way, mostly because the US hasn't let them. 12% renewables. What's the common element here? We're way ahead. So Bob Ray said this the other day, and I decided to steal it. We were born on third, but we feel like we hit a triple. You know, we feel like we're way in front of everybody, and therefore it's very, very difficult for us to make an argument that we need to keep moving ahead. We're doing better. It's really difficult to get action on climate or energy when you're a little tiny piece of the global puzzle, when if you cleaned up all your emissions, it almost doesn't even affect the standard deviation of global emissions, and you're a very green country to start with. There's a lot of inertia in the system. The other common element is that electricity is not our problem. You know, everybody likes to focus on it because we can solve it, but it's not. It's transport and to a lesser extent fossil fuel development. Transport. If we could deal with transport, we would be a long way of the way towards fixing the problems that ail us. So geopolitics. This doesn't answer the transport question, by the way, but maybe it gets at it a bit. It's hard to see the map back there, so it's kind of an eye test. But that is Canada. And this is the way that we generate our total primary energy. This is production, not supply, so this includes the stuff we export. And you can see now the politics of Canada laid out on a map, because there's Alberta, a gigantic circle, mostly oil, bit of coal, bit of natural gas. Tiny slice of renewables in there. You can see that certain provinces, Ontario, Quebec, BC, and New Brunswick to some extent, we look green. Manitoba. There's a big green proportion there. Other provinces look very, very red. And the truth is that we now have a real division between the provinces that have the fossil fuels and the provinces that don't. And if you look at the haves and the have-nots, more often than not, the haves are the ones that have the fossil fuels. The have-nots are the ones that don't. That's politics in Ontario or in Canada right now. That's just the numbers. Why is it important? Well, it's important because oil prices look like this. And you can't see it. Again, it's an eye test. The dark red, which you can see, is what we call the nominal price, the price that you pay, going right back to the 1950s for West Texas Intermediate, which is the de facto North American price. There's a light pink curve, which looks like a shadow, but up much higher. That's the real price in US dollars per barrel. All this is meant to tell you is that right now, oil prices are basically as high as they ever have been, which is why we can afford to get at all these resources out west, because those resources are not cheap to access. And it's only the very, very high prices that are driving that forward. We had one spike that hit $147 back in 2007. Immediately, the economy crashed. People blame the failure of the banks and the mortgages. I blame the high energy prices. Every company in the United States and Canada, most companies around the world, were stretched to the limit. They could not pay their bills. And so what happened? A few people started hitting their mortgage payments or missing their mortgage payments, and things started to collapse. That's what happened, I think, in 2007. This high energy price is good for Canada and is bad for Canada. And that's a big part of the dialogue that we've never had, right? It's good for Canada because we make a lot of money off of this. a lot of the transfer payments that pay for healthcare and for education and for all the things that we like come from the corporate taxes that the oil sands companies are paying to access the oil, which is at that high price. But that high price means that we're losing companies in other parts of Canada that could also be contributing those taxes. We want high prices and low prices. I'm part of an energy futures project, and we tried to come up with a guiding statement, and in the end we compromised and we said we want high fossil fuel prices and cheap electricity prices, because that's the only way that we could reconcile the two. That means more renewables, and it means moving in that direction. Just to round out my graphs, this is our total primary energy production, about 16.5 exajoules, and this is what we exported in 2010. We exported about 50% of that 5.8 in oil, another 5 in coal, some natural gas, and a little bit of electricity, most of which is being exported from Ontario and Quebec. We make a lot of money off those exports, and then for those reasons we want those energy prices to be high. But then we want to use energy domestically, and so we want prices to be low. It's a very difficult thing to get our head around. This is where the oil is. We've already sort of seen this. Ontario does have a little bit of oil down by Sarnia. There's a dot there. BC has some. It's not on Vancouver Island. It's just underneath the other dot. Saskatchewan has some. Newfoundland has some. Nova Scotia has some, but they haven't been able to access it yet. So does Nunavut. They haven't been able to access it yet. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is, if we're writing energy policy now just for the sake of energy policy, are we writing good energy policy? This is where road transport fuel use is going. In Canada, road transport fuel use is predicted to go up. You can barely see it. It's right here. We're going to go up. In China, we think road transport use is going to go up. We think, except that the statistics from China are so bad that nobody really has any idea. That's why the error bar runs from 15,000 to 40,000, because it could be anything. We don't really know. In the United States, transport fuel use is going down. It's going down every year now. This is a recognized trend. It's a worrisome trend for countries like us that want to export oil to the States so that they can use it. They're becoming more energy independent and they're using less. Out of all these countries, 21 countries, 10 of them have a declining trend in road fuel transport. Those trends are probably going to accelerate. Are people going to want to buy the oil that we're selling 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road? It's starting to look less and less like that's a for sure yes. It's starting to look more and more like maybe not as much. So what are the big issues, the big policy issues? Well, we have a problem with our oil in that the greenhouse gas footprint is proportionately larger than was with most oil types. That's because it takes more energy to get it out of the ground. The Canadian government is fond of quoting one LCA that only puts that footprint at 3 or 4% higher than conventional oil. There are other LCAs, which I think are probably more accurate, that put it at more like 20% above or 25% above. Some of the most egregious examples are probably 2 or 3 times the energy per unit, although those are not viable. The demand for oil is changing. I don't think we're ready for the demand for oil to change. Shale gas and tight oil, which I haven't talked about at all because it's mostly happened south of the border, has totally changed the Canada-US energy dynamic in a very, very short amount of time. You would think it just happened out of the blue, like nobody ever expected it to happen. The truth is that the energy sector has been seeing it coming for the last 35 years, but nobody has been listening to what they've said. Our resources are landlocked. They're largely under a single province's control. This is both our biggest problem in terms of transport infrastructure and what we might do. It's also our biggest problem from a climate perspective. We have one province that has the lion's share of this resource that's driving our economy forward. And so writing a climate policy that doesn't just stop that economy is very, very difficult. And we care about renewables, we do, but we already do it better than most people, so why should we improve? Why make it better when we're already doing so well? So part 4, the pipeline shuffle. You can't talk about energy in Canada without talking about pipelines. Here's the pipeline map. This is existing in solid and proposed or pending in dotted lines. The dotted line down to the States is Keystone XL. The southern dotted line in the BC area is the Trans Mountain, and the northern one is Northern Gateway. These are all pipelines that are on their way or will be on their way. With Northern Gateway, you get about 500,000 barrels a day. Trans Mountain gives you just under 600,000 barrels a day. Keystone gives us 830,000 barrels a day. If you add that all up, we're just under 2 million barrels a day of excess capacity. Now, we're not building all those pipelines yet. You know, it's not a slam dunk. Enbridge is very confident. They're starting to put together their procurement process and to build the camps. There are a lot of challenges to that particular pipeline, although the National Energy Board has given approval or recommended approval to that project. Trans Mountain is about to run into a whole mess of trouble because they've just decided to move their line in Burnaby, which is no longer a second run sort of a city, but it's a very, very high-priced BC city, and they have lots of money and lots of people willing to fight this. And then, of course, there's Keystone XL, which, as we know, has been stalled. It seems permanently on Barack Obama's desk. There's been a lot of talk about the environmental impact. Buried in one report was that the State Department figures that Keystone XL will only create 35 permanent jobs. 35. This is a lot of work for 35 jobs. That's all I gotta say. I bet they're good jobs, though. Natural gas pipelines, I'm not going to talk about all of them, just the one, Energy East, which is designed to take the existing Trans-Canada pipeline from Alberta to just south of Ottawa, and then to extend it with a new pipe into St. John. This would be 1.1 billion or barrels a day, 1.1 million barrels a day. If you add all of them up, that's 3 million barrels a day of oil capacity for those 4 pipeline projects. 3 million barrels a day is exactly what the government of Alberta wants to get to in terms of oil sands expansion. If they were to build them all, that's where we would be able to be. I actually don't believe that they'll ever build Energy East all the way to St. John. I suspect that a lot of the oil will stop in Quebec. The reason that St. John has been mentioned and continues to be mentioned so much is that the government in New Brunswick is keen to have this project. And so they've got a premier who's a champion of the project. The premier in Quebec, well, we don't know who she'll be in a few weeks' time. The premier in Ontario, same story. The Western premiers, they've all signed off and supported this. But look, the Western provinces, the footprint of the pipeline is small. The footprint in Ontario is gigantic. It's like the equivalent of the West and the East put together. We're the province that actually has to take the brunt of this pipeline if it gets built. Pembina has done a report and said that they would increase greenhouse gas emissions. This is not rocket science. If you add 1 million barrels a day of production and you move that out to the coast, of course you're going to see an increase in emissions. The real question is, would you see that increase in emissions even if they didn't build the pipe? And right now, what's happening is that everything that isn't being moved by pipe is being moved by rail. Now, we've done some work in our group. We know that moving oil by rail, particularly bitumen, which doesn't have to be diluted to go into a hopper car, is actually more energy efficient than moving it by pipe. I don't know if we have enough rail capacity to take another 1 million barrels of production and to move it either west or east. Most of our rail system is clogged. is clogged to the point that the government just told the two big companies that they had to move a certain amount of grain every week to try to empty the silos because the silos are full because they had a bumper crop last year. And right now, they don't want to do that because they get a more lucrative contract if they move oil. So we have a conservative government, which is the champion of the oil sector, actually championing the farmers, which is good. I guess it's just confusing. I actually think we could do a lot by expanding the rail network and moving more oil that way. It is more energy efficient, therefore less emissions, therefore just a more healthy system overall. But we've had these problems. The oil at Lac Mégantic was not oil sands oil, it was Bakken oil. Bakken oil is tight oil. It's the stuff that comes out of the fracking, the hydraulic fracturing of the rock. When you frack, you send all these chemicals down to get out gas and oil out of the ground. I've heard it compared to, the oil compared to soda pop. It's full of bubbles, and the bubbles are all natural gas. They're methane and other chemicals. And so if you put that into a tank car and you move that tank car into a position where it can be hit by another tank car and maybe spark, the chances of an explosion are much, much worse than they are with oil sands oil. However, the public no longer makes any differentiation between the two. And I think that the days of talking about rail for oil, if they're not over, they're on hiatus until we can figure out a way to kind of bring the discussion back. Finally, there's electricity. You know, electricity is really the common currency for energy in the future. That's what everything will be powered by eventually. The nice thing about electricity is you generate it all from one place, and therefore it's easier to handle those emissions. You can scrub them. Maybe you can even capture them, although I'm not a big fan of the carbon capture and sequestration story. The chances are that we're going to find better ways of dealing with stationary generation than we are of dealing with mobile generation. And so one of the ways to deal with those big, heavy transport numbers is to look at ways that we can electrify the rail lines, electrify the systems that we have. It's incredibly expensive. It's not a cheap idea. You know, Toronto is falling over trying to electrify 200 kilometers worth of GO line. To try to electrify thousands of kilometers worth of CN mainline doesn't seem like it's ever going to fly, but that is the way that we start to address those emissions, because we start to find cleaner ways of bringing the goods to market. There have been a whole lot of other stories. You know, this propane shortage that's come up this year. We've had explosions on the pipelines, the natural gas pipelines. Just recently, we've had Enbridge and Union Gas announcing that they're going to raise the price of natural gas, which is going to impact electricity, it's going to impact home heating, it's going to do all sorts of things. What are the big issues? Energy transport, you can do it a bunch of ways. None of them are a free ride anymore. You know, oil pipelines aren't invisible. How do you obtain social license to build a new pipeline? I don't know. Maybe you can't. Maybe that's a good thing. Natural gas pipelines, they're highly developed, but relatively low prices for natural gas compared to oil means that we're giving up capacity. The rail system is very flexible. It's low energy. It's old. We've got serious safety concerns. Our electricity grid is totally provincial. Long-range transmission is very problematic. We can do it. But what we actually need is good science and not industry jockeying. And what we're facing right now is a series of governments, not just our federal government, but provincial governments, that believe that industry can figure this out. They'll sort it out between themselves. They're not sorting it out, they're jockeying for position. They're all fighting to be at the front so that they get the contracts, so that they can take the contracts and move the goods. We have 10 provinces, we have 10 unique perspectives. How do you build a consensus for a truly Canadian energy policy? This is the part where it would be great if I had a good answer. There isn't really a great answer. We can do nothing. Lots and lots of good stories about how we should just do nothing, and how most of what's going on is not our fault. It's the sunspots probably, or something. The UN climate chief is probably a crook. You know, he had to step down, and there was that Himalaya thing. And yeah, all these things are kind of there. We could do nothing and let the U.S. decide. We have a very long history of working together on energy and environmental files. The U.S. is basically our only market, with a few exceptions. We need to diversify, yes, and that's what we're working to do, although, you know, at the same time we're fighting back against that diversification because we don't really want the pipelines, it seems. We don't really want that expansion. So there's a lot going on, and I think that Canadians are very conflicted over where they want it to go. And if we don't figure out something, the U.S. will decide for us. You know, when Harper wrote to Obama and said maybe we could talk climate policy, the actual answer, if Obama chose, would be that Obama would write back with a draft of Canada's climate policy, and Obama could, or Harper could sign off. We could create a real national response. This is the famous bumper sticker, "Let the Eastern bastard trees in the dark." We haven't really been able to do this well in the past. This lecture is too short to go into the whole history of climate policy and energy policy, but the root of the problem really goes back to the National Energy Program and the fact that Peter Lougheed and Pierre Trudeau didn't like each other and used to fight a lot. And because of that, we were never able to get a good national policy in place when we needed it. Because of that, we've created this rift between East and West. We created the Reform Movement, which has given us the modern Conservative Party. We've created an Alberta that has not benefited anywhere close to what they should be benefiting from their resource, and a country which is becoming more and more dependent on their resource without a real plan for how it's going to all unfold. So the takeaway, and this is where I come to the end, and I've probably gone too long, so I apologize. Individual provincial responses, they need to be harmonized with a national response. But it takes leadership to make it happen. And right now we don't have a champion. You know, a couple of years ago I gave a variant on this talk, and I said, oh, Alison Redford is our champion because she's awesome. And I do think she was awesome, but she's no longer the champion for anything, except for maybe penthouse suites and things like that. The elephant in the room is that energy policy is climate policy. I hear lots of people tell me that this government doesn't write climate policy. That's not true. They write climate policy every day. It's the energy policies that they're putting into place, and our choices need to address climate policy. We need very good science to inform those decisions. The number of energy experts in Canadian universities, in Canadian think tanks, is limited to a few handfuls. There are very few people doing work on this day in and day out. We need strategies on transport, and I think that's our number one concern. Number two is fossil fuel development. We got to figure out transport first. It's those trucks. The trucks are driving up our emissions much faster than anything else. If we can't deal with that, we got a problem. Electricity. We got to deal with electricity, but we're actually dealing with it. We're on a good trend there. We just need to continue doing that. We have to complement U.S. policies, but we don't have to follow blindly. Don't wait for Obama to sign off or to integrate our markets or to do whatever it is that he's going to do. Lots of people have made whole careers about waiting for Obama. I don't think we need to. We can consider our own options. And that takes me to the end.